I forgot to tell my son I had called a technician to fix the security camera. When I checked what he and my daughter-in-law were doing, I froze. After 10 minutes, the worst happened. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, in what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My house in Potomac is a fortress of glass and silence. It stands on a bluff overlooking the river, a modern masterpiece of sharp angles and clean lines, a stark contrast to the stately, old money brick colonials that surround it. My late husband, Marcus, had been the architect not just of the house but of our life. He had designed this place for our retirement, a space filled with light, art, and the quiet hum of the state-of-the-art technology he so adored. A year after his death, the light felt interrogating, and the silence was a physical presence, a constant low-grade hum that vibrated in my bones. I am Deborah Hayes, and for 30 years I was the Honorable Deborah Hayes of the United States District Court. My life was one of order, of logic, of evidence presented and verdicts rendered. I was good at it. I could spot a lie in a witness's testimony from 100 yards, could sense the weakness in a lawyer's argument like a wolf scenting prey. My mind was my weapon, my refuge, my identity. Now in the quiet expanse of my 61st year, that mind had little to occupy it but the ghosts of past cases and the persistent, gnawing worry for my son. My only comfort, in a strange way, was the house itself. More specifically, the security system Marcus had installed in his final year. It was his last great obsession, a digital fortress with motion sensors, pressure plates, and a network of high-definition cameras that covered every inch of the property. A building is only as strong as its weakest point. Deb, he used to say, tapping the large monitor in his study that displayed the live feeds. And I'm not leaving you with any weak points. At the time, I'd found his obsession a bit morbid. A man preparing for his own absence with fiber optic cables and encrypted servers. Now, living alone in this vast, quiet house, I was grateful for it. It was his last gift to me, a silent, digital guardian. My son David was my only other connection to the vibrant, love-filled life I'd once known. He was my golden boy, handsome, charming, and successful. Or so I believed. He had his own financial advisory firm, a beautiful wife, Simone, and a life that from the outside looked like a perfect reflection of the privileged world he'd been raised in. But since Marcus's death, I'd sensed a change in him, a new tension around his eyes, a frantic, almost desperate energy he tried to mask with his usual easy charm. When I'd ask, he'd brush it off. Just the market, Mom. It's a tough climate. I chose to believe him. The judge in me might have cross-examined, might have probed for the truth, but the mother in me, lonely and desperate for her son's affection, simply wanted to believe he was okay. My love for him had become my greatest judicial blind spot. I spent my days in a quiet, orderly routine, a walk by the river in the morning, a few hours with my law journals in the afternoon, a simple dinner for one in the cavernous kitchen. I often found myself in Marcus's old study, a room I had kept exactly as he'd left it. It was a beautiful, soundproofed sanctuary, lined with books on architecture and with a single large window overlooking the woods. And on his desk, the large security monitor, its grid of silent, watchful images, a constant humming presence. It was the digital ghost of my husband, still keeping watch, and it was from this very room that the first innocuous crack in my quiet, lonely world would appear. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I first noticed the problem. I was in the study, ostensibly reading a complex appellate court decision, but in reality I was just watching the silent, shifting images on the security monitor. It had become a habit, a form of mindless digital birdwatching. The camera on the front gate showed a delivery truck arriving. The one on the back terrace showed a squirrel making a daring raid on the bird feeder. The camera in the living room showed a shaft of afternoon sun slowly creeping across the Persian rug. And then there was the feed from the camera in the study itself. Marcus, in his typical belt and suspenders approach to security, had even installed a camera in the very room that housed the monitor. It was a small discrete dome in the corner of the ceiling, offering a wide-angle view of the entire room. But today, that feed was flickering. The image would appear for a few seconds, a clear, sharp picture of me sitting at the desk, and then it would dissolve into a cascade of digital static, a hash of green and purple lines. I tapped the screen, an old habit from a less technological age, as if that would fix it. The image returned, then vanished again. A glitch. A minor, mundane, and deeply annoying technological failure. I sighed. For all of Marcus's obsession with creating a flawless system, he had overlooked one key variable: entropy. Everything, eventually, breaks down. I did what any sensible non-technical person would do. I called the people who had installed the system, a high-end security firm from Bethesda that Marcus had trusted implicitly. I described the problem to the calm professional voice on the other end of the line. A flickering feed, you say? On just the one camera, the technician asked. Sounds like it could be a loose connection, maybe a problem with the fiber optic cable running to that unit. Nothing to worry about. We can have someone out there to take a look. When? I asked, already annoyed at the prospect of having a stranger in my quiet house. I have an opening tomorrow afternoon. Say 2 o'clock. Our senior technician, Mr. Davies, can handle it. He worked with your husband on the initial installation. He knows the system inside and out. The mention of Mr. Davies was reassuring. He was a quiet, competent man who shared Marcus's passion for elegant technological solutions. Tomorrow at 2 will be fine. I said, thank you. I hung up the phone, the problem already receding in my mind. It was a simple domestic issue, a loose wire in the digital fortress. I made a mental note to be home for the technician, and then I promptly put it out of my mind. It was a small, insignificant detail in the quiet, orderly landscape of my day. I had no way of knowing that this convenient, mundane little glitch, this simple loose wire, was about to become the lens through which I would witness the complete and utter destruction of my world. The phone rang the next morning as I was finishing my breakfast. It was David. My heart gave its customary little lift. A call from my son was a rare and welcome interruption to the silence of my days. Mom, he said, and I could hear the stress in his voice immediately. It was a tight, strained sound he was trying and failing to mask with a cheerful tone. I'm so sorry to do this to you last minute, but I'm in a huge jam. What is it, sweetheart? I asked, my maternal concern instantly kicking in. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. Fine, he said, a little too quickly. It's just business. You know how it is. My office building, they've had a sudden pest control issue. A fumigation. The whole building is closed for the next 48 hours, and I have the most important meeting of my career this afternoon. The absolute make or break meeting. The story was plausible enough, I suppose. Unexpected things happened, but my old judge's instincts, dormant but not dead, flagged it as convenient. The suddenness of it. It's with Kendrick Shaw, he continued, dropping the name like a trump card. I knew the name well. Kendrick was a wealthy, semi-retired investor, but more than that, he had been one of Marcus's closest friends. A man my husband had mentored for years. Kendrick had trusted Marcus implicitly, and after his death he had transferred that trust, and a significant portion of his retirement portfolio, to my son. I need a place to meet him, David said, his voice a frantic, pleading rush. It has to be completely private, completely secure. I can't take him to a coffee shop. We're going over his entire portfolio, very sensitive information. And then I thought of Dad's study. It's perfect, it's quiet, it's impressive, and it's completely soundproofed. Would it be okay, Mom? Could I possibly borrow the study for just a couple of hours this afternoon? I would be eternally grateful. It would literally save me. I felt a warm rush of pleasure. It had been a long time since my son had needed me for anything more than a holiday dinner. To be able to provide him with something he so desperately needed, to be the solution to his problem, was a balm to my lonely soul. The small, suspicious voice of the judge in my head was instantly silenced by the loud, eager voice of the mother. Of course, darling, I said, my voice warm. The house is yours. The study is perfect for a meeting. When will you be here? Around 1, to get set up. Mr. Shaw is coming at 1:30, he said, the relief in his voice palpable. You're a lifesaver, Mom. You really are. And listen, this is a really high-stakes, high-pressure meeting. It would be amazing if you could just give us our space, maybe relax in the sunroom or the garden, just so we're not disturbed. You know how Kendrick likes his privacy. Of course, David, I said, a little wounded by the suggestion that I would be in the way, but I pushed it down. I'll make myself scarce. You boys have the study all to yourselves. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. See you soon. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen, a smile on my face. My son needed me. I was helping him with the most important meeting of his career. I felt useful. I felt happy. And in the warm, pleasant glow of that maternal happiness, the mental note I had made the day before, The small, insignificant detail about a technician named Mr. Davies coming at 2 o'clock to fix a loose wire on a single flickering camera, completely and utterly evaporated from my mind. David and Simone arrived shortly after 1 o'clock, an hour and a half before the technician was due. Their arrival was a flurry of activity and an almost suffocating level of affection. "Mom, you look wonderful," Simone said, gliding into the foyer and giving me an air kiss that smelled of Chanel and something else, something sharp and anxious. She was dressed in a pristine white power suit, her beauty as sharp and as polished as a diamond. She was a walking, talking advertisement for the successful life she and my son were supposed to be living. David followed, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He gave me a hug, a quick, tense embrace that felt more like a strategic maneuver than a gesture of affection. "Thanks again for this, Mom," he said, his eyes darting around the foyer, not quite meeting mine. "You're a true lifesaver." There was that phrase again, lifesaver. It was beginning to sound less like a compliment and more like a job title. Their behavior was subtly, almost imperceptibly wrong. It was like a perfectly composed piece of music played slightly out of key. They were too effusive, their smiles too bright, their energy too frantic. They were performing. A judge sees performances all the time on the witness stand, and I knew one when I saw it. I attributed it to the high stakes of their meeting, the pressure to impress a client like Kendrick Shaw. "The study is all ready for you," I said, leading them down the long sunlit hallway. I had Maria put out some fresh coffee and some pastries. "Oh, you shouldn't have," Simone said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "We just need the space. We have a lot of documents to lay out to prepare for Kendrick's arrival. We should probably get started right away." They were eager, almost desperate to get me out of the way. When we reached the study, they stood in the doorway, effectively blocking me from entering my own husband's sanctuary. "We'll just get everything set up, Mom," David said, his hand on my arm, gently but firmly guiding me back down the hall. "Why don't you go and relax in the sunroom? Put your feet up. You deserve it. We'll come and get you when we're done." The sunroom was at the opposite end of the house, a beautiful glass-walled room that overlooked the river. It was also, I noted with a flicker of judicial observation, the room in the house furthest from the study, the one place where I would be least likely to overhear anything. All right, I can take a hint," I said with a laugh, allowing him to herd me away. "You two work your magic, just don't bankrupt Mr. Shaw." David forced a tight, brittle smile. "Don't worry, Mom, his assets are perfectly safe with me." The line, in retrospect, would be chilling. At the time, it just felt like my son's usual, slightly arrogant confidence. I settled into a comfortable armchair in the sunroom with a book and a fresh cup of tea. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, the view of the river placid and beautiful. But I couldn't relax. The discordant note of their arrival, the subtle wrongness of their behavior, continued to echo in my mind. It was a lawyer's instinct, a judge's gut feeling that something in the testimony I had just heard did not add up. I tried to dismiss it. I was being oversensitive. I was a lonely old woman, starved for her son's attention, and I was reading too much into a simple case of pre-meeting jitters. I was being the suspicious, formidable woman Julian had warned me about in the previous story. Oh, wait, that was a different story. I am Deborah Hayes now. I am a retired federal judge. I am not a diplomat. My son's name is David. I tried to focus on my book, a dense biography of Thurgood Marshall, but the words on the page blurred. My mind kept drifting back down the long hallway, to the soundproofed study where my son and his wife were preparing for a meeting. The unease, the low-grade, persistent feeling that I was missing a key piece of evidence refused to go away. I must have drifted off. The warmth of the sun, the quiet hum of the house, and my own troubled thoughts had conspired to pull me under. I awoke with a start to the sharp, insistent buzz of my cell phone on the glass table beside me. I looked at the time. It was 2:05. The technician. I had completely forgotten. My heart sank. Had he arrived? Had David and Simone had to deal with him? How embarrassing. I fumbled for the phone, my mind still thick with sleep, and answered. "Hello? Mrs. Hayes? It's Mark Davies from Apex Security," the familiar, professional voice said. "I'm sorry if I woke you. I just wanted to let you know that I'm all done." "Done?" I asked, confused. "But you didn't ring the bell. I didn't let you in." "Oh, your son, David, let me in about 45 minutes ago," he explained. "He said you were resting and not to disturb you." He showed me to the study, a very polite young man. My mind was reeling. David had let him in. He had known the technician was there, and he hadn't said a word to me. He had deliberately kept it from me. Why? He said you had a big meeting in there. Mr. Davies continued, oblivious to the sudden cold dread that was seeping into my veins. He and his wife were very accommodating. They just stepped out into the hallway for a few minutes while I worked on the camera. And, is it fixed? I asked, my voice a strange, tight thing. Good as new, he said with a note of professional pride. It was just what I thought. A loose fiber optic cable in the junction box in the ceiling. An easy fix. The feed to the steady camera is crystal clear now. In fact, I'm looking at it on my diagnostic monitor as we speak. Just running the final checks. You should be able to see it perfectly on your app. The clarity on these new 4K cameras your husband installed is really something else. He was still talking, explaining some technical detail about bandwidth and resolution, but I was no longer listening. My entire being was focused on 3 words he had said. I'm looking at it. The technician was watching a live crystal clear feed from inside the study right now, and David and Simone were in there, and Mr. Shaw. Thank you, Mr. Davies, I interrupted, my voice suddenly sharp, commanding. You've been very helpful. You can send the invoice to my email. Will do, Judge Hayes, he said. Have a good day. I hung up the phone. My hands were trembling. The unease I had felt all day was no longer a vague, shapeless thing. It was a sharp, specific, and terrifying alarm. David had known about the technician. He had deliberately concealed his presence from me. He and Simone had stood in the hallway, waiting for the one blind spot in their fortress of privacy to be repaired, for the camera to be brought back online. Why? Why would they be so accommodating, unless they didn't see the camera as a threat, unless they had forgotten it was there, or unless they believed no one was watching? I looked at the tablet sitting on the table beside my book. The screen was dark. On it was the Apex Security app, the small icon a silent, watchful eye, my husband's last gift, his digital fortress, his way of keeping me safe. My mind was screaming. This is insane, Deborah. This is your son. You are letting your suspicious, cynical mind run away with you. But the judge in me, the part of me that had listened to 1,000 plausible lies, the part that knew the darkest truths often hide behind the most respectable facades, was screaming back. Evidence. You need evidence. My thumb, trembling slightly, hovered over the security app icon. I felt a profound, almost nauseating sense of guilt. I was about to spy on my own child. It was a violation of the sacred trust between a mother and a son. But what if that trust was already broken? I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was a judge, and a judge has a duty to see the evidence. All of it. I tapped the screen. The app opened with a soft, electronic chime, a sound that was usually reassuring but now felt like the tolling of a bell. The home screen appeared, a grid of small live video feeds from around the property. The front gate, the back terrace, the kitchen, the living room. All of them were silent, peaceful scenes of an empty house. My house. My eyes were drawn to the box labeled study. The thumbnail image was no longer a flicker of static. It was a clear, stable image of the corner of Marcus's desk and the back of an empty leather armchair. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A part of me, the hopeful, loving mother, wanted to close the app, to dismiss this whole thing as a paranoid fantasy, to trust my son. But the judge, the cold, analytical part of me that had sent men to prison based on the smallest of inconsistencies, could not let it go. The feeling of wrongness was too strong. David and Simone's performative affection, their eagerness to isolate me, their deliberate concealment of the technician's visit. These were not the actions of a son preparing for a simple business meeting. These were the actions of people with something to hide. I thought about the law, about the reasonable expectation of privacy. I was about to commit a profound invasion of that privacy, but this was my house, my security system, and a judge's first duty is to the truth. My thumb moved, as if of its own accord, and tapped the thumbnail for the study. The image expanded to fill the entire screen of the tablet. The 4K resolution was, as Mr. Davies had promised, breathtakingly clear. The camera, mounted in the ceiling corner, provided a wide, sweeping view of the entire room. I could see every detail with a chilling, almost cinematic clarity. The intricate pattern on the Persian rug, the titles of the books on the mahogany shelves, the condensation on the glass of water sitting on the small table. And the people. My breath caught in my throat. This was not a business meeting. This was an interrogation. Mr. Kendrick Shaw, a kind, gentle man of 68 who had been a friend of my husband's for 40 years, was sitting bolt upright in the armchair. His face, usually so full of a warm, avuncular charm, was pale with terror. His eyes were wide, darting back and forth between the two people standing over him. My son, my David, was standing behind the armchair, his hands gripping Kendrick's shoulders, pinning him in place. David's face was a mask of sweaty, desperate resolve. He was not the confident financial advisor, he was a terrified accomplice, a man in so far over his head that he was drowning. And Simone was standing in front of the chair, and she was the one in command. Her beautiful, charismatic face was a study in cold, reptilian focus. The warmth and charm were gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, predatory ambition beneath. She was holding something in her hand. I zoomed in, my fingers trembling on the screen. It was a syringe, the needle glinting in the soft lamplight of the study. A small, clear vial of liquid was attached to it. I frantically fumbled with the controls on the app, my mind struggling to process the horrifying, incomprehensible scene before me. I found the audio icon and tapped it. The silent movie on my screen was suddenly filled with sound, the high-fidelity microphone on the camera picking up every single chilling word. The sound that came through the tablet's speakers was chillingly clear, a pristine, high-fidelity recording of my world ending. The soundproofing on the study, designed by Marcus to keep the noise of the world out, was now working in reverse, creating a perfect isolated soundstage for a horror film, and I was the sole member of the audience. So much easier this way, Kendrick. For everyone. Simone's voice, stripped of its usual musical charm, was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a sociopath. Just a signature, a simple transfer of assets. And then this all goes away. No mess. No fuss. She held up the syringe, the needle catching the light. Think of this as a retirement bonus. A little prick, a long peaceful nap on the car ride home, and your heart will just stop. A massive, unexpected cardiac event. At your age, with your history of high blood pressure, no one will question it. Your family will be sad, of course, but they'll be comforted to know you went peacefully in your sleep, after a very successful and profitable meeting with your trusted financial advisor. The clinical, matter-of-fact way she described his murder was the most horrifying part. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a business transaction, a hostile takeover of a human life. I watched, my body frozen, my mind screaming. The tablet in my hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. This was a scene from a movie, a nightmare my sleep-addled brain had concocted. But then Kendrick Shaw spoke, and his voice, though trembling with a righteous fury, was a grounding, terrible dose of reality. "You are monsters," he snarled, his eyes blazing with a defiance that was both magnificent and heartbreaking. "Both of you, your father David. Marcus was a good man, an honorable man. To see his son, his legacy, reduced to this, a common greedy little thug, threatening an old man, he would be so ashamed." At the mention of his father's name, I saw David flinch. A flicker of something, shame, guilt, passed across his face. His grip on Kendrick's shoulders seemed to loosen for a fraction of a second. Simone saw it too. "Don't listen to him, David," she snapped, her voice sharp as a whip. "He's trying to get in your head. This is the only way. You know it is. Think about the alternative. Think about ruin. Think about prison. This is our one and only way out. Now hold him still." David's face hardened again, the brief moment of humanity gone, replaced by the grim, desperate resolve of a cornered animal. His knuckles were white as he tightened his grip. "Just sign the papers, Kendrick," David pleaded, his voice a pathetic cracking thing. "Please, don't make us do this." "Never," Kendrick said, his voice a low, powerful growl. "I will never sign. You can kill me, but you will not have my money, and you will not have your souls." The raw courage in his voice, the sheer unyielding integrity of the man, was a stark contrast to the sniveling, cowardly greed of my son and his wife. Kendrick Shaw, in that moment, was more of a man than my son would ever be. And then, everything happened at once. Kendrick Shaw was 68 years old, but he was not a frail man. He was a man who had built his own fortune, a man who had survived market crashes and business betrayals. He was a fighter, and he was not going to die in an armchair, at the hands of these two pathetic, greedy children without a fight. With a sudden explosive roar of pure desperate rage, he surged upwards. The move was so unexpected, so powerful, that it threw David completely off balance. Kendrick shoved back with all his might, sending David stumbling into a small side table, which crashed to the floor in a cacophony of shattering glass and splintered wood. Kendrick was on his feet, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with the fire of a man fighting for his life. "You want my money?" he roared. "You'll have to kill me for it." Simone, her face a mask of shocked fury, lunged at him, the syringe held out like a dagger. The plan for a neat, quiet, natural causes death was gone. This had just become a violent, messy, and very real struggle. Kendrick, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, was shockingly fast. He swatted her arm away, his hand connecting with her wrist with a sharp crack. The syringe flew from her grasp, arcing through the air and skittering across the polished hardwood floor, disappearing under the heavy ornate bookshelf against the far wall. "No!" Simone shrieked, her cold composure finally shattering, replaced by the raw, ugly fury of a predator whose prey was fighting back. The three of them were now locked in a frantic, clumsy, and utterly terrifying dance of violence. The beautiful, soundproofed study, my late husband's sanctuary of peace and order, had become a cage for a desperate three-way brawl. David, recovering his balance, scrambled to his feet and tackled Kendrick from behind, trying to wrap his arms around the older man's chest. But Kendrick was a solid, powerful man, and he fought back with a desperate, surprising strength, throwing elbows, trying to break free. Simone, her primary weapon gone, began to circle them like a jackal, her eyes scanning the room for another tool, another advantage. She was no longer the elegant real estate agent. She was a street fighter, her face twisted into a snarl of pure murderous intent. I watched, my hand clamped over my mouth, a silent scream trapped in my throat. I was utterly, completely paralyzed. My body was frozen in the armchair in the sunroom, 1,000 feet and a lifetime away from the brutal life-or-death struggle happening on my tablet screen. My mind, the mind of a federal judge, was screaming a list of commands. Call 911, run, scream, do something. But the mind of the mother, the mind of the woman who was watching her own son, her own flesh and blood, commit an act of such profound, irredeemable evil, was simply broken. I was a spectator at the demolition of my own soul. The rational part of me knew that I had to act, that Kendrick's life was on the line. But I was trapped in a state of pure, horrified cognitive dissonance. The images on the screen were too monstrous to be real, yet the sounds, the grunts of effort, the thud of bodies against furniture, Kendrick's desperate gasps for air, were undeniably terrifyingly authentic. The struggle on the screen went on, a chaotic, blurry nightmare. A lamp was knocked over, books were swept from a shelf. The once orderly room was being torn apart, and I just sat there clutching my tablet, a silent, helpless witness to the absolute worst moment of my life. The 10 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each second a slow-motion tableau of escalating horror, each minute an eternity of helpless observation. My paralysis was not just physical, it was a total system failure of my moral and emotional being. The judge in me knew what had to be done. The mother in me could not comprehend what she was seeing. And so I did nothing. I just watched. The struggle in the study devolved from a frantic brawl into a grim, exhausting battle of attrition. David, younger and stronger, finally managed to wrestle Kendrick into a semblance of control, pinning his arms from behind. Kendrick, his face flushed a deep, alarming red, his chest heaving, was beginning to tire, his initial burst of adrenaline fading, replaced by the grim reality of his age and his situation. "Let's just go," David grunted, his voice strained with the effort of holding the struggling older man. "Simone, it's over. Let's just tie him up and go. We can get out of the country." He was looking for an exit, a way to rewind the clock, to undo the catastrophic mistake they had made. But Simone was no longer listening. Her eyes were wild, her beautiful face contorted into a mask of pure reptilian focus. The failure of her neat, tidy plan had enraged her, had stripped away the last thin veneer of her humanity. She was no longer a schemer. She was a killer. "He's seen our faces, you idiot," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous thing. She was pacing the room now, her eyes darting around, searching. "We can't just walk away now. There's only one way this ends. He goes down, or we do. There are no other options." Her gaze swept past the overturned lamp, the scattered books, and then it landed on the bar cart in the corner. It was a beautiful antique piece, a gift I had given Marcus for our last anniversary together. On it sat a collection of his favorite single malt scotches and a set of heavy leaded crystal glassware. And in the centerpiece of the collection was a ship's decanter, a magnificent heavy piece of crystal with a solid weighty stopper. I saw the moment she saw it. I saw the flicker of realization in her eyes, the cold pragmatic decision being made. I knew what was going to happen a full 10 seconds before it did. And still I could not move. "What are you doing?" David asked, his voice a panicked squeak, as he watched her walk towards the bar cart. "I'm finishing this," she said, her voice a low chilling growl. "I'm saving us." She picked up the decanter. She held it in her 2 hands, testing its weight. It was heavy, a solid, 3-pound piece of cut glass, a perfect improvised weapon. "Simone, no," David pleaded, his voice cracking. "Don't, please. We can just—" "Hold him still, David," she commanded, her voice the sound of pure unadulterated ice. "Or so help me, I will do this to you next." The threat was not idle. I saw it in her eyes. She meant it. And David, in that moment of ultimate cowardly weakness, believed her too. His struggle with Kendrick ceased. His hold on the older man's arms became a grim, unbreakable vice. He was no longer trying to restrain him. He was presenting him, an offering to his wife's monstrous resolve. Kendrick saw it too. He saw the shift in David's eyes, the surrender. He saw Simone approaching, the heavy crystal decanter held in her hands like a ceremonial club. He stopped struggling. A strange, almost peaceful look of resignation settled on his face. He looked directly into the camera, directly at me, his eyes full of a terrible silent accusation, and then he closed them. I sat there in my sun-drenched peaceful room, 1,000 miles and a universe away. The 10 minutes of terror were over. The final, irrevocable moment had arrived, and I was about to become a witness to a murder. The moment before the final, brutal act was one of surreal, terrible silence. The frantic sounds of the struggle ceased, replaced by the heavy, ragged breathing of the 3 people in the study. On the screen of my tablet, the scene was frozen in a grotesque tableau. My son, the captor, his face a mask of sweaty, terrified capitulation. Mr. Shaw, the victim, his eyes closed in a moment of grim final acceptance. And my daughter-in-law, the executioner, standing over them, the heavy crystal decanter held in her hands. In that last suspended second, my mind, the mind of the judge, took over with a cold, analytical clarity. I was no longer a paralyzed mother. I was an observer of a crime in progress. I registered the details with a chilling precision: Simone's stance, balanced, athletic, her weight on the balls of her feet, her grip on the decanter two-handed, firm, maximizing her leverage, her expression not one of rage, but of pure, dispassionate focus. The look of a person performing a difficult but necessary task. And then, she moved. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. She raised the decanter high over her head, the heavy crystal catching the lamplight, scattering a brief, beautiful rainbow of colors across the ceiling. For a fraction of a second, she looked almost biblical, an avenging angel of greed. And then she brought it down. The movement was a blur of vicious, efficient force. The sound, even through the high-fidelity microphone of the camera, was a sickening wet thud, a sound that will be seared into my memory for the rest of my life. It was the sound of a life being extinguished. Kendrick Shaw's body went limp in David's arms, a dead weight. David, in a reflexive act of horror, let him go, and Kendrick crumpled to the floor like a discarded puppet, his head hitting the Persian rug with a soft final sigh. He did not move again. A thin dark line of blood began to seep from his gray hair, staining the intricate cream-colored pattern of the rug beneath him. Silence. The study was utterly, completely silent. Simone stood over the body, her chest heaving, the heavy decanter still held in her hand, a single drop of blood clinging to its cut glass surface. David stared at the still form on the floor, his mouth agape, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. You killed him," he whispered, the words a hoarse, strangled thing. Simone looked from the body to David, and then back again. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. It was not a smile of pleasure, but of a grim, terrible satisfaction, the smile of a problem solver who has just arrived at a final, brutal solution. "No, David," she said, her voice a low, steady, and utterly chilling purr. "I saved us." She set the decanter down on the bar cart, her movements calm and deliberate. The point of no return had been crossed. The line between a clumsy failed extortion and a cold-blooded murder had just been erased. There was no going back. There was no escape. They were no longer just greedy, desperate fools. They were murderers. And I, Deborah Hayes, retired federal judge, had just become the sole secret witness to the entire horrific and unforgivable event. The paralysis was gone. The shock was gone. The mother was gone. All that was left was the judge. And the evidence. The moments after the fatal blow were a study in the stark, terrifying difference between my son and his wife. David was a statue of pure, unadulterated horror. He stood frozen, his eyes locked on the still form of Kendrick Shaw on the floor, his body trembling with a violent, uncontrollable shudder. He looked like a boy who had just witnessed a ghost, but the reality was so much worse. He had just become a party to the creation of one. Simone, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of cold, pragmatic energy. The act of violence, far from shattering her composure, seemed to have galvanized her. The last vestiges of panic were gone, replaced by a chilling, clear-eyed focus. She was no longer a real estate agent. She was a crime scene cleaner, and she was already assessing the job ahead. "Don't just stand there, you idiot," she snapped at David, her voice a low, urgent hiss. The transformation was complete. The charming, supportive wife had vanished, replaced by a ruthless, contemptuous field commander. "He's dead. We can't change that. What we can change is what happens next. Now pull yourself together and help me." Her sharp command seemed to break the spell of David's horror. He looked from the body to her, his face a mess of tears and disbelief. "What are we going to do?" he whimpered, his voice the sound of a terrified child. "We are going to be smart," she said, her eyes darting around the room, her mind already working, processing, planning. "We are going to create a new story, a better story. This was not an extortion gone wrong. This was a robbery, a tragic, random robbery." She began to move with a swift, purposeful efficiency. "First, fingerprints," she said, grabbing a silk throw pillow from the armchair. "Wipe everything. The doorknobs, the table, the glasses." She tossed the pillow at David. "Start with the decanter, wipe it clean, then put it back on the floor, near his head. Like the robber dropped it." David, moving like a sleepwalker, did as he was told. He picked up the heavy crystal weapon, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He clumsily wiped it down, smearing the single drop of blood across its surface before setting it on the rug. "Now his wallet," Simone commanded, pointing at the body, "and his watch. Take them." The robber would have taken them. David recoiled in horror. I can't rob a dead man." Simone let out a sigh of pure, exasperated fury. She strode over to the body herself, her expensive heels silent on the blood-stained rug, and with a cold, dispassionate efficiency, she reached into Kendrick's jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. She unclasped his heavy gold Rolex from his wrist. She shoved both items into her own pocket. "Next, the window," she said, looking at the large plate glass window that overlooked the woods. "The point of entry. It has to look forced." She picked up a heavy bronze bookend from the mantelpiece. "We break it from the inside. It'll look like they smashed it to get in, then ran out this way when we discovered them." She handed the bookend to David. "Do it." He stared at the heavy object in his hand, then at the window. He was being asked to physically vandalize his own childhood home, to add another layer of desecration to the horror that had already occurred. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Now, David," Simone hissed. With a choked sob, he turned and threw the bookend at the window. It struck the glass with a loud, unsatisfying thud, leaving a spiderweb of cracks but not shattering it completely. "Useless," Simone snarled. She grabbed the bookend from him and, with a grunt of pure, furious effort, she smashed it into the glass again and again until a large gaping hole appeared. The sound of the shattering glass a sharp final punctuation mark on their descent into pure, irredeemable evil. They stood there for a moment, breathing heavily in the now violated study, surrounded by the evidence of their crime and their clumsy, frantic attempts to conceal it. They had done it. They had committed a murder, they had staged a crime scene, and I had watched it all. I had every mistake, every word, every damning action, perfectly preserved in high definition, crystal clear detail. The worst had happened, but for them, the very worst was yet to come. The 20 minutes following the murder were a masterclass in panic and incompetence. Their attempt to stage a robbery was so clumsy, so full of obvious amateurish mistakes, that it would have been almost comical if it weren't so deeply tragic. A seasoned detective would take one look at this scene, and know within seconds that it was a fabrication. And I, a judge who had spent a lifetime listening to detectives detail just such scenes, was watching their every single damning error, my mind automatically compiling a list of the evidence that would convict them. First, the window. They had broken it from the inside, a fact that would be immediately obvious from the spray of glass on the lawn outside. A real robber would have broken it from the outside to gain entry. Strike one. Second, the fingerprints. While Simone had been meticulous about wiping down the main surfaces, they had both been touching everything else in the room during the struggle. The overturned lamp, the scattered books, the edge of the desk. In their panic, they had contaminated the entire scene, leaving behind a rich tapestry of their own DNA and prints that would be a treasure trove for any forensics team. Strike two. Third, the murder weapon. David, in his horrified, trembling state, had done a terrible job of wiping down the decanter. I could see, even on the tablet screen, the faint reddish smear he had left on the crystal, and in placing it near the body he had set it down on a corner of the Persian rug that was clean, unstained by the pool of blood, a pristine object in a sea of violence that made no logical sense. Strike three. They were fools. They were children who had committed an adult crime, and they were now trying to clean up a mess that was far beyond their comprehension. Okay, Simone said, her voice a ragged, breathless thing. She was trying to project an aura of control, but the panic was beginning to fray the edges of her composure. Okay, I think that's it. We need to go. We need to leave the house, be seen somewhere, and then we discover the body when we get back. We call 911, we are hysterical, we tell them we came back to check on Mom and found this. It was a terrible plan, full of holes and inconsistencies, but it was the best their panicked, guilty minds could come up with. David just stood there staring at the body of the man he had helped to kill, his face a pale greenish color. My mother, he whispered, his voice a horrified croak. What about my mother? She's in the sunroom. She could have heard the glass. Simone let out a sigh of pure, exasperated fury. She's an old woman, David. She probably fell asleep, and the study is soundproofed, remember? That was the whole point. She heard nothing. She saw nothing. She is our alibi, you idiot. Now pull yourself together and let's go. She grabbed him by the arm and began to drag him towards the door. They were about to leave. They were about to walk out of that room and into the next phase of their lie, leaving the body of their victim to be discovered. And it was in that moment that my paralysis, the frozen, horrified shock that had held me captive for what felt like a lifetime, finally blessedly broke. The final brutal act of violence, the sound of the shattering glass, the cold, clinical finality of Simone's plan. It was as if a switch had been flipped in my brain. The part of me that was a mother, the part that was weeping and screaming and refusing to believe, went silent. It was a mercy killing. That woman, the soft, loving and ultimately naive mother of David Hayes, died in that armchair in the sunroom. And the woman who was left, the one who took a deep, steadying breath and felt the trembling in her hands cease, was someone else entirely. She was the Honorable Deborah Hayes. She was the judge. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of horror and grief, was suddenly a place of cold, crystalline clarity. The emotional, human part of the equation was over. This was now a matter of law, of evidence, of procedure, and of justice. I looked down at the tablet in my hands. The live feed was still running, a silent, damning testament to the depravity I had just witnessed. My first thought was not of my son, not of my own heartbreak, but of the integrity of the evidence. With a hand that was now as steady as if I were signing a court order, I located the record function on the security app. I pressed it. A small red dot appeared in the corner of the screen, confirming that the live feed was now being saved directly to the system's encrypted hard drive, and to a secure cloud server. I had just preserved the single most important piece of evidence in a capital murder case. My mind began to work with the speed and precision of a lifetime spent on the bench. I started to build the case in my head. The people versus David and Simone Hayes. I had motive. The financial statements on my own computer would prove their desperate financial state. I had opportunity. They had lured the victim to a private, isolated location. And I had the act itself, captured in pristine 4K detail, with crystal clear audio. It was an open and shut case. There would be no plausible deniability, no clever legal maneuvering that could save them from this. I had them. I watched them on the screen as they prepared to leave the study. They were about to walk out into my house. They were about to put the next, deceitful phase of their plan into motion. And I knew, with an absolute certainty, that I could not let that happen. I could not allow them to contaminate the rest of my home with their lies. I could not allow them the satisfaction of performing their fraudulent grief for me. The verdict had been reached. It was time to deliver the sentence. I did not feel fear. I did not feel rage. I felt a profound, almost serene sense of purpose. I was an instrument of the law I had served my entire life, and the law demanded that I act. I stood up from the armchair, my movements calm and deliberate. I took the tablet with me, the screen still glowing with the horrific real-time image of the crime scene. I walked out of the sunroom and down the long, quiet hallway, my bare feet making no sound on the cool marble floors. I walked towards the study. I walked towards the two murderers who were my son and my daughter-in-law. I was no longer a victim, cowering in a distant room. I was the judge, robed in a righteous, terrible fury, on my way to take my seat on the bench, and court was now in session. As I walked down the hallway, the tablet held before me like a sacred damning text. My legal mind was already several steps ahead. My first instinct, the citizen's instinct, was to call 911, but I immediately dismissed it. A 911 call would trigger a standard chaotic response. A dispatcher would send the nearest patrol car. The officers who arrived would be walking into a complex high-stakes situation, unprepared. There would be confusion. There would be shouting. There would be the risk of contamination of the crime scene. And there would be the risk of my son, in his panicked, cornered animal state, doing something even more stupid, something that could get him or an officer hurt. No. A situation this extraordinary required an extraordinary response. It required precision. It required control. I needed to control the narrative, not just for the sake of the case, but for the memory of my husband and the tattered remnants of my family's name. This could not become a media circus, a salacious headline about a fallen society family. It had to be handled with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a sealed indictment. I knew exactly who to call. In my 30 years on the bench, I had seen hundreds of police officers, detectives, and federal agents pass through my courtroom. I knew the good ones from the bad, the smart ones from the sloppy. And there was one who had always stood out. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was a homicide detective with the Montgomery County Police. A man with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and an integrity as solid as bedrock. I had presided over his first major case, a complex, multi-defendant murder trial, when he was just a rookie detective. I had been impressed then by his meticulous attention to detail, his calm demeanor under pressure, and his unwavering commitment to the truth. Over the years I had followed his career. He had become one of the best, and he was a man I knew I could trust. I stopped just before the final turn in the hallway that would bring me to the study door. I could hear their muffled voices from inside, a low, urgent murmur of panic. I pulled out my cell phone and found his number in my contacts, a private cell number he had given me years ago after a particularly difficult case. "In case you ever need anything, Judge," he had said. Anything at all. I had never imagined I would be calling him for this. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. "Detective Thorne." "Detective," I said, my own voice a thing of pure cold ice. "This is Judge Deborah Hayes." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line. "Judge Hayes," he said, his voice now infused with a note of respect and concern. "It's an honor. Is everything all right?" "No, Detective," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "Everything is not all right. I am at my residence. There is an active crime scene in my late husband's study. There has been a homicide." I heard his sharp intake of breath. "Judge, are you safe? Where are the perpetrators?" "The perpetrators are my son and my daughter-in-law," I said, the words tasting like poison, but I delivered them with the dispassionate clarity of a legal finding. "They are currently in the study with the victim. They are unarmed. They believe I am unaware of the situation." "My God," he whispered. "Judge, stay where you are. I'm dispatching units right now. Do not engage them." "No," I said, my voice a sharp absolute command that stopped him cold. "You will not dispatch units. Not yet. This is a delicate situation and it will be handled with precision. You will come yourself. You will come to the north service gate of my property. You will come alone, and you will come quietly. No lights. No siren. The gate will be open. I will meet you there, and Detective, you will follow my instructions to the letter. Is that understood?" There was another pause. I had just given a direct and highly irregular order to a lead homicide detective, but he did not question my authority. He heard the judge in my voice. He heard the absolute, unshakable command. "Understood, Your Honor," he said, his voice now a low, serious growl. I'm on my way. 10 minutes. I hung up the phone. I now had 10 minutes before the law, in the form of Detective Thorne, would arrive. 10 minutes to confront the two people who had destroyed my world. I took a deep breath, clutched the tablet in my hand, and turned the corner. The study door was just ahead. It was slightly ajar. It was time to enter my courtroom. David and Simone were standing in the middle of the study, their backs to the door, their frantic whispered argument filling the violated space. They were so consumed by their own panic that they didn't hear me approach. Have to call now, Simone was hissing, her phone in her hand. The longer we wait, the more suspicious it looks. I can't, David whimpered, his hands clutching his head. I can't do it. I can't pretend my voice. They'll know. Get it together, David. She snarled. You will do it. You will cry. You will be the shattered son. It's the only story that saves us. Now, take a deep breath and... That won't be necessary. My voice, calm and clear, cut through the room like a shard of ice. They both froze, then spun around. The expressions on their faces were a painter's study in guilt and terror. If I had been a ghost, they could not have looked more horrified. They saw me standing in the doorway, my face a mask of cold, impassive judgment, the glowing screen of the tablet held in my hand. Mom? David whispered, the word a pathetic, dying gasp. Simone's mind, always the quicker, the more calculating of the two, was already scrambling for a new lie. Mother Hayes, she cried, her face instantly transforming into a mask of frantic, wide-eyed terror. Thank God you're here. Something terrible has happened. A man, a robber. He broke in. He attacked Kendrick. We tried to stop him, but he ran out the window. It was a brilliant performance, a masterpiece of improvisation. In another context I might have admired her skill, but I was not an audience. I was the judge, and I had already seen the unedited director's cut of the evening's events. I said nothing. I simply took a step into the room, my eyes sweeping over the manufactured chaos, the shattered window, the overturned lamp, the body of my friend on the floor. Then I looked back at them, and I slowly, deliberately, turned the tablet screen so they could see it. On the screen, in crystal clear high definition, was the image of Simone, her face a snarl of murderous rage, bringing the heavy crystal decanter down on Kendrick Shaw's head. I watched the last vestiges of hope and denial drain from their faces. I watched their lies shrivel and die in the cold, hard light of the incontrovertible truth. Simone's mouth opened, but no sound came out. David let out a low, guttural moan and sank to his knees, his face buried in his hands. The game was over. It was in that moment of their complete and utter ruin that I heard the soft crunch of tires on the gravel outside. Detective Thorne had arrived. They're here, I said, my voice flat. Who? Simone whispered, her eyes wide with a new dawning horror. Just then the study door, which had swung partially shut behind me, was pushed fully open. Detective Thorne stood there, a tall, imposing figure in a simple dark suit. His expression was grim, his eyes taking in the entire horrific scene in a single sweeping glance. The body, the shattered glass, the two perpetrators and me, the judge, standing over them all. Two uniformed officers stood just behind him in the hallway. David and Simone stared at him, their faces a picture of utter damning confusion. This was not part of the script. The police were not supposed to be here yet. They were not supposed to be this quiet, this calm, this official. David Hayes, Simone Hayes, Detective Thorne said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that filled the room. I'm Detective Thorne, Montgomery County Homicide. You're both under arrest for the murder of Kendrick Shaw. Simone finally found her voice. It was a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. Murder? What are you talking about? We're the victims here. We have rights. I want my lawyer. David just stayed on his knees, sobbing, his entire body shaking. The officers moved in, their movements practiced and efficient. They pulled Simone's hands behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs, a sound of absolute finality. They did the same to my son, pulling him from his knees and securing his wrists. They were being read their rights. The familiar liturgical words of the Miranda warning, a stark, surreal soundtrack to the end of my family. As they were being led away, two shattered, ruined people being escorted from the scene of their own self-destruction, David turned his head and looked at me one last time. His face was a mess of tears, snot, and a profound, uncomprehending despair. His eyes were not asking for forgiveness, or for help. They were asking a question. How? I did not answer. I simply held up the tablet, its screen still glowing with the evidence of his crime. Detective Thorne walked over to me, his expression a mixture of professional respect and deep human sympathy. He looked from the cuffs being placed on my son to the tablet in my hand. "You have the footage, Your Honor?" he asked quietly, his voice for my ears alone. I looked down at the screen. The recording was still running. I could see the whole horrific scene, a permanent digital scar. I could see myself, a silent still figure in the doorway, an unseen witness who had seen everything. I looked up from the screen past the detective to the face of my son as he was led down the hallway of the house he had grown up in. The house he had just desecrated. His childhood was over. His life was over. My life as his mother was over. "Every second of it, Detective," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion, the voice of a judge delivering a final, irrevocable finding of fact. "The evidence is absolute." I paused, and then I delivered the last two words, the ones that would close this case, and close the book on the life I once knew. "The verdict is in."